Vito, thanks so much for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Anytime. So you represent a group that represents landlords and property owners. And as you know, and as I know, there is a group of Democrats out there right now pushing the idea of canceling rent, which is a little bit more complicated than it sounds, but essentially tenants would not have to pay rent under this proposal. And there are a few others where some landlords would be reimbursed, others would not. I think it's fair to say that your group, the Rent Stabilization Association, is probably against that proposal. Tell me how it would affect landlords if it went into law.
Well, by way of background, obviously, when this pandemic first hit the city, anybody, any worker, any tenant, any property owner, homeowner, immediately, would hit the panic button. What am I going to do if I'm not working? How am I going to pay the bills? The elected officials' immediate response to that is, well, let's push for a cancel rent movement, which, to be honest, it's not just a matter of not being fair to the property owner, but it's just not financially feasible, because at the end of the day, there's a notion that, landlords, the vast majority of landlords in New York are making money hand over fist, which just isn't the case. The city is composed mostly of small property owners that rely on their monthly rent payments to pay for their vital operating expenses, whether it's property taxes, water and sewer bills, or any other operating expense to keep the building afloat on a month-to-month basis. So even one a month where there's a cancel rent movement, if you think about a building that's composed of only 6 units, you're taking all the income away from that property owner who relies on it. And when this happened earlier in March, building owners were on the verge of owing their property taxes for the upcoming fiscal year. So the cancel rent notion immediately created panic for owners who weren't sure how they were going to pay these expenses without their rent money.
Right. The big thing with all of this is that everything costs money. And that's part of why the state, early on in this, froze evictions for tenants that couldn't pay their rent. It's been called an eviction moratorium. It's still going on. I'm really curious about this because, so I'm up in Albany. You're down in New York City, obviously. That's where your group represents. How often have we seen tenants not be able to pay rent during this? What are you hearing from landlords on that? I'm wondering if it's common or if it's kind of an exception to the rule right now.
Well, to be honest, it's hit or miss. For some property owners, they might be lucky where their tenants, the vast majority of their tenants may have never lost their jobs. But I can say one thing, it was definitely a lot easier, believe it or not, earlier on in the pandemic when federal unemployment assistance was elevated to $600 additionally per month, which helped substantially. And then there were the stimulus checks that were sent to tenants. So we're kind of stuck in a crossroad right now where there unfortunately are still thousands of tenants who are without jobs trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent. And the federal assistance has been cut off. We're waiting for Congress to reconvene at some point to try to come to some kind of agreement to help these people who are still unemployed. And the state recently provided a COVID rent relief program where they allocated up to $100 million for low-income tenants throughout the state. And unfortunately, that's ended only because there were a limited amount of tenants who were able to apply for that. And once that $100 million was met, then the program was shut down. But it's our understanding that the state housing agency, everything was able to be flow nicely. Tenants were helped, and building owners are going to start seeing their subsidy payments through that. So that should help substantially for both the tenants and the property owners.
Do you think that we can get through this housing crisis without help from the federal government? Is there anything the state can be doing to make sure that landlords and property owners can hold on to their properties and keep tenants in those buildings to secure that they actually have a future there?
Well, unfortunately, I wish I had an answer for that, but the budget deficit in the state is much bigger than what we're dealing with in the housing market. I mean, there's small businesses that have shut down that may never come back, and it's not just in New York City; it's throughout the entire state. So we should have an idea in the next couple of weeks about, where the state stands in terms of the budget deficit. We're hoping there is additional funding somewhere down the line to protect the tenants. Unfortunately, it's too early to tell, but we are hoping at some point, whether it's federal assistance to the state or just somewhere deep down, there are state funds that are available that could end up helping these tenants.
All right, Vito Signorelli from the Rent Stabilization Association, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you.